The Japanese gunner grinned as his sights found the Americans, Marines crawling through the open ravine, easy prey. The Type 92 roared, chewing mud and flesh alike. Men dropped flat, pinned in the open. There was nowhere to run, no cover, no escape. It was May 7th, 1945, and rain had turned the coral ridges of Okinawa into rivers of mud. From his makeshift machine gun nest dug into the rock, the gunner saw everything: wrecked trees, stalled Marines, and shattered helmets sinking into the muck. For days, nothing had got past him. He reloaded and aimed at something crawling up the hill. He fired and missed. His gun jammed. Cursing, he tore the belt free and slammed it back in. A shimmer from a metal cylinder caught his eye. Then came a faint hiss, cutting through the rain. He turned toward the sound, only to see a mud-covered Marine pointing a flaming nozzle straight at him. And in an instant, the air itself was on fire. By 1944, the war had consumed nearly every part of the world. Cities lay in ruins across Europe, jungles burned in the Pacific, and the seas were littered with wreckage. The Allies were pushing forward, but few believed the fighting would end anytime soon. Far from the front lines, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a young man named Albert Ernest Schwab was living an ordinary life. Born in Washington, D.C. in 1920, he briefly attended the University of Tulsa before working for an oil company. Friends described him as cheerful, athletic, and a daredevil. Once, he and a few friends built a homemade diving helmet and tried it out in the Arkansas River. He nearly drowned, but Albert was always the kind of person who jumped in first, ready to test himself. At 23, he was married and had a baby on the way. The war felt far away, but it crept into every corner of Tulsa, including ration stamps for sugar, blackout curtains of the refinery, and the drone of training aircraft from a nearby airfield. Some nights, Albert and his friends would crowd into the Rialto Theater and watch newsreels of B-29s burning Tokyo or Marines storming a beach called Saipan. The images looked like they came from another planet, but the names kept getting closer. That spring, Albert walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office with his friend Tom Nickel and signed his name. He never said exactly why, only that it felt like he was doing the right thing. He was inducted into the Marines on May 12, 1944, and sent to San Diego for boot camp. After training, he came home on a brief 10-day leave, allowing his family to see him in uniform. When Albert reached Camp Pendleton and joined the 2nd Training Battalion, the pace hit hard from the first morning. Built from California ranch land 2 years earlier, Pendleton was a city of tents, rifle ranges, and dusty roads. Nearly every Marine bound for the Pacific passed through it. Veterans from Guadalcanal and Tarawa returned to train the newcomers. Their sun-bleached uniforms and quiet authority reminded everyone what waited across the ocean. The fighting in the Pacific was burning through men faster than the Corps could replace them, and every instructor made sure the recruits understood that. Down in Las Pulgas Canyon, Albert crawled through barbed wire while machine guns cracked overhead. Dust and smoke filled his mouth as tracers snapped through the air. The ground trembled with mortars, and the instructors shouted to keep moving no matter what. Some mornings, trucks took them to the coast near Oceanside for beach training. They waded out to Higgins boats, then charged through the surf with rifles and packs, fighting the waves as officers shouted from the sand. They learned to keep their weapons dry, spread out once they hit shore, and push forward. Saltwater chewed their boots and skin raw, but it taught them how to fight their way off a boat and onto land. When they'd mastered the surf landings, the focus turned to weapons. Albert learned to handle everything, from the M1 Garand to the Browning automatic rifle. During training, he got his first look at the flamethrower, a heavy, awkward weapon that seemed to breathe when triggered. The fuel tanks made the operator a target, and one hit could set you on fire. The instructors said few men had the strength or nerve to use it. Albert took that as a challenge. The M2 flamethrower was one of the most feared weapons of the Pacific War, a 35-pound pressurized fire carried on a man's back. 2 steel cylinders of thickened fuel fed a hose and a wand-like projector, the tip of which was constantly lit by a pilot flame. When triggered, it shot a jet of burning liquid nearly 100 feet, turning defenses into firestorms. Simple in design, it used twin fuel tanks, a nitrogen propellant, and an ignition system built to work in mud and heat. In combat, however, the operator stood out instantly, marked by the shape of the tanks and the faint hiss of pressure behind him. On islands where every ridge and cave was dangerous, the man with the flamethrower drew more fire than anyone else. The weapon's first real test came at Tarawa in November 1943, a small coral island turned fortress by the Japanese. Artillery and naval guns had pounded the beaches for days, but when the Marines waded ashore, they found most of the defenses still intact. Flamethrower teams crawled forward under machine gun fire, closing to within feet of the bunkers before unleashing streams of fire through the firing slits. The liquid flame filled pillboxes with smoke and heat, clearing paths for the infantry. The Marines learned quickly that only fire could reach where steel and high explosives failed. By the time they reached Saipan, the flamethrower had become indispensable. The island's ridges and ravines hid defenders from bombardment. On the slopes of Mount Tapachau, Marines fought yard by yard, driving the enemy from one cave to the next. Assault teams moved in pairs, with one covering and the other advancing with the tanks, releasing short bursts into cave mouths until the rock glowed and the air turned to smoke. Still, each shot came with a physical toll. The tanks were heavy, the fuel sloshing with every movement. The heat and the crawl across open ground wore men down. Yet the fighting never stopped. Each island demanded more replacements, more training, more men willing to shoulder the weapon, repeating the same drills, stepping into the same danger, never knowing how short their turn would be. As such, at Camp Pendleton, new faces arrived every week, while others shipped out. Trains came up from San Diego, packed with recruits, and left again full of Marines, some bound for advanced weapons school at Camp Elliott, others heading west through San Francisco or Pearl Harbor. Pendleton had become a machine built to forge men for war, and Albert was part of it. Watching the trains pull away, he felt a mix of nerves and pride. Soon, he would be on one of them. By the fall of 1944, orders came assigning him to the 13th replacement draft, bound for the 1st Marine Division, the same men who had fought through Guadalcanal and Peleliu. Albert felt the weight of it sink in. Training was over. In November, he boarded USS Wharton, a white troop ship that had once been a passenger liner before the Navy stripped away her luxuries and filled her decks with rows of canvas bunks. Wharton was a workhorse of the Pacific, hauling replacement troops, wounded men, and mail across thousands of miles of ocean. As the ship cleared Point Loma, San Diego faded into the mist. Albert watched the coast shrink to a brown line. For most aboard, it was their first look at the Pacific, and for some, their last glimpse of home. When the Wharton dropped anchor off Pavuvu Island, part of the Russell Islands, the tropical air hit like a wall. The island steamed after every rain, turning trails into ankle-deep mud. Mosquitoes swarmed in black clouds, and the Marines joked that they were the island's real defenders. Hospital ships arrived daily from Peleliu, decks lined with stretchers. The new men tried not to stare, but they couldn't help it. Others trained until collapse, running flamethrower drills along the beach as corsairs screamed overhead. Every week brought more ships, heavy with supplies. Something big was coming. The 1st Marine Division was still recovering from Peleliu. What was supposed to be a quick 4-day operation had turned into one of the bloodiest fights of the Pacific War. Peleliu was only 6 miles long, a coral island carved with ridges, caves, and tunnels. The Japanese no longer defended the beaches or charged headlong into gunfire. This time, they waited underground, keeping hidden, being patient, and dug so deep that artillery couldn't touch them. When the first waves of Marines landed, they met silence. Then the ridges erupted. Machine guns opened from unseen slits, and mortars rained from the heights. The air filled with coral dust, choking the men as they crawled for cover that didn't exist. Every few feet, someone went down. It was over 110 degrees in the shade, and there was no shade that wasn't under fire. Canteens ran dry by mid-morning. Men collapsed from heat before they ever saw the enemy. Flamethrowers became the only weapon that could reach the buried defenses. Each bunker had to be taken by hand, crawling forward, tossing grenades through the slits, then flushing the defenders out with fire. The flames filled the openings, heat rolling back like a wave. When it was over, the men stumbled away, blackened with ash and smoke. The job got done, but it broke the men who did it. There was no distance. Every shot meant getting close enough to see what the fire did, close enough to feel the heat and smell it afterward. After 73 days, the division was shattered. Companies that had landed with 200 men came out with 40. Some battalions were reduced to platoons. The rest lay in hospitals or under white crosses in the coral. Peleliu was meant to clear the way for MacArthur's return to the Philippines. Instead, it became a preview of what the rest of the Pacific would demand. Major General William H. Rupertus, still in command of the 1st Marine Division, oversaw its slow recovery after Peleliu. His men were exhausted, but discipline and routine kept them moving. It would be his last campaign. Illness would soon force him to hand command to Major General Pedro del Valle. Albert was assigned to Headquarters Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. On Christmas Eve, he was promoted to Private First Class, a routine step for a Marine who'd proven steady and capable through months of training. It was his first holiday away from home, and the first stripe he'd earned on his own. As one of the bigger men in his company, he was given an M2 flamethrower, the weapon everyone else hoped to avoid. Still, he learned to handle it until the machine felt like part of him. Live burn exercises were the worst. The heat was overwhelming, and the tanks on his shoulders grew scorching hot. Each burst lasted only seconds, but a jam or a bad seal could turn the weapon against its operator. Leaks, cracked valves, and flashbacks were constant threats. Sometimes the nozzle jammed, or the igniter failed to spark. When it did, the operator had to kneel in the open and fix it by hand, while everyone else stepped back. The weapon's own manual warned that it was dangerous to use in crosswinds or near solid cover, and Pavuvu had both in abundance. Albert trained until his legs went numb, running from Higgins boats into the surf and through the island's dense jungle. The veteran said the real thing would just be hotter, louder, and far less forgiving. In training, Schwab rarely stood out for speed, but instructed noted his steadiness under pressure. When the fuel lines burst or the igniter failed, he kept on working until it was fixed, refusing to step back even when the weapon burned his gloves. The long grind of training ended in February 1945. Crates were packed, weapons checked, and the final roll call taken. The 1st Marine Division was on the move, and Albert Schwab was going with it, flamethrower and all. By early 1945, Allied planners faced a grim reality. The war was entering its final act. To bring Japan to its knees, they needed a foothold close enough to launch air raids, build airfields, and stage the final invasion. The place was Okinawa. The operation, codenamed Iceberg, was meant to be the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War. Nearly 180,000 soldiers and Marines would go ashore, supported by more than 1,300 ships and their own tactical air force. To lead it, the U.S. formed the 10th Army, a rare joint command, under Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., combining Army and Marine divisions with their own air, naval, and amphibious forces. 5 days before the main landing, on March 26, 1945, U.S. forces struck the Kurama Islands, 30 miles west of Okinawa. The assault fell to the 77th Infantry Division, supported by destroyers and cruisers offshore. Before dawn, naval guns opened up, turning the small islands into walls of smoke and flying coral. Landing craft followed through rough surf, carrying troops toward beaches still shaking from the bombardment. Their goal was to clear out Japanese positions and secure anchorages for the invasion fleet. Resistance was scattered but intense. Japanese troops fired from caves and ridgelines until coordinated infantry and naval gunfire wiped them out. When the fighting ended, Marines and soldiers combing the coves uncovered hundreds of small wooden boats, each loaded with explosives, designed for one-way attacks on Allied ships. If those boats had launched, they could have torn through the invasion fleet before it reached Okinawa. Others found more still tethered offshore, primed for a final strike that never came. By the end of March, engineers were laying airstrips, artillery units were moving into position, and the lagoons were crowded with supply ships and repair tenders. The staging ground was secure. The invasion of Okinawa was next. Intelligence reports painted a grim picture of Okinawa's southern hills, describing it as a landscape of caves, coral ridges, and concrete bunkers dug deep into the rock. The invasion would need assault engineers and flamethrower teams, and Schwab's platoon, trained in demolitions and close-range assault tactics, fit the bill exactly. Their convoy assembled at Guadalcanal, then again at Reliti, where the whole invasion fleet, hundreds of ships stretching to the horizon, came together. From there, elements of the division were sent across the Russell Islands, including Benica, for their final amphibious rehearsals. All through March, Schwab drilled for precision. Every movement was timed, every step repeated until it became reflex. The lagoon smelled of diesel and salt as he climbed into the Higgins boat with his platoon, the tanks on their backs clanking against the steel hull as the engines kicked over. The coxswain opened the throttle, and the flat-bottomed craft slammed into the surf. Around them, dozens of boats fanned out, bouncing through the chop. Overhead, Navy guns fired practice salvos that sent white geysers leaping ahead of the beach. The ramp dropped, and cold seawater rushed in. They hit the surf running, boots sinking into coral sand as engineers dashed forward to plant training charges. The blast thumped across the beach, heavy, even without live explosives. Schwab advanced on a muck pillbox that resembled a cave. His assistant swung the hose clear as he pulled the trigger, sending a streak of flame into the opening that disappeared in a wave of heat. The air shimmered, and the stench of burned fuel clung to his gear. Even in practice, it felt too real. Offshore, officers with stopwatches shouted wave times while smoke grenades hissed in the shallows. Medics ran casualty drills under simulated fire. Radios crackled, voices clipped and sharp. By dusk, Schwab's platoon sat in silence on the transport deck, gear stacked beside them, the fading light glinting off their tanks. They'd run the beach 3 times that day, each landing tighter than the last. The next one wouldn't be a drill. At the end of the rehearsals, Schwab's section leaders recorded him as fully qualified with the M2, a demanding mark few achieved without incident. On Easter Sunday, April 1st, 1945, the 1st Marine Division landed on the western beaches of Okinawa. Dawn broke quietly over the western coast of Okinawa. The sea was glassy, the sky pale and clearing, thin haze hanging over the fleet like breath before a storm. At 5:10 a.m., Schwab's transport squadron, part of the 1st Marine Division under 3rd Amphibious Corps, slid into its launch position. From the deck, he watched the horizon erupt. Carrier planes screamed overhead, diving through mist in tight rolls. Destroyers opened up in long, steady bursts, their guns hammering the beaches until the air itself shook. Each concussion thudded deep in his chest. At 8:30 a.m., the first assault waves went in. Schwab's platoon followed minutes later, packed shoulder to shoulder in a Higgins boat, its diesel fumes mixed with salt spray. The hull slammed against the reef, once, twice, then ground to a stop. They surged forward into the surf, rifles raised, the heavy tanks on their backs clanking with every step. They braced for gunfire, not for the shriek of mortars, but none came. The beach ahead was empty, silent. The landing, expected to be another Tarawa or Peleliu, was almost easy. They crossed open ground under a clear sky. By mid-morning, the 7th Marines had pushed past Sobe, and the 6th Division to the north was nearing Yontan Airfield. By late afternoon, the division commander came ashore to find his men dug in for the night, exhausted, wary, and half convinced it was all a trap. 4 days later, the 1st Marine Division had advanced across Okinawa's narrow waist, reaching the east coast and splitting the island in half. Then came the waiting. Their orders were to clear the north, ridge by ridge, cave by cave. The terrain fractured into terraces and coral escarpments that tore at boots and lungs alike. Fighting came in short, violent bursts, and then silence. The main Japanese force, the 32nd Army, had pulled south to the fortified Shuri line. On May 1st, new orders arrived. The division would move south to relieve the 27th Infantry Division. The trucks rolled through steady rain, wheels sinking into mud, as artillery flashed on the horizon. On May 7th, the rain had turned Okinawa's ridges into rivers of mud. For days, the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines had been fighting south through the tangled foothills below the Shuri line. Their next target was Wilson's Ridge, a jagged rise of coral and brush about 500 yards south of Owacha and 800 yards northeast of Takeshi. The ridge and the valley beneath it, soon known as Death Valley, formed a key strongpoint, guarding the southern approach to Shuri Castle. Caves, tunnels, and pillboxes overlapped in layers, each one covering the other. Schwab's canopy was moving through the soaked ravines, and sudden bursts of machine gun fire ripped through the air. A Japanese gun, buried deep in a coral cave halfway up the slope, locked down the valley with intersecting lines of fire. The first volleys dropped men where they stood. Those who survived hit the mud and stayed flat as tracers cut through the downpour. Anyone who moved was hit. Grenades rolled uselessly back down the slick coral before they could reach the enemy. Commanders huddled behind the slope, searching for options. Artillery was too close to call, and the cliffs on both sides made flanking impossible. Every minute they waited, another man went down. Schwab looked up toward the cave, the M2 flamethrower tank strapped tight across his back. He knew what it meant to move now, and what it would cost if he didn't. He started crawling forward, hugging the coral's jagged folds for cover. Bullets cracked overhead, chewing into the rocks above him. Each push sent pain through his arms and legs, but he stayed low, moving through every dip and shadow the ridge offered, dragging the heavy hose behind him, closing the gap yard by yard. When he reached the cave's lip, the gunner was already turning the barrel toward him. Schwab raised the wand and squeezed the trigger. A torrent of flame burst out, engulfing the cave in a roaring wave. Smoke and fire rolled up the ridge in a single violent surge. The gun fell silent. From below, the Marine saw the blaze and surged forward, taking the lower slope that had held them down all morning. Schwab stood in the open, rain falling, steam rising from his gear. The position was gone. His company was moving again. Then, from deeper in the coral, a second machine gun opened up. Its first bursts tore through the line, cutting down several Marines and throwing the company back into the mud. The advance that had clawed halfway up Wilson's Ridge stalled again, pinned beneath the rhythmic chatter echoing from the caves above. Schwab crawled back through the muck, his tank nearly empty. There was no time to refill, not with men motionless only yards away, and the second gun cutting them to pieces. He looked up the slope, rain streaming from his helmet, and made his choice. He still had a few seconds of fuel left. He started forward again, low and fast, a flamethrower's hose dragging behind him. Bullets snapped past, puncturing the coral. He climbed in bursts, using shell holes and ledges for cover, never hesitating. Halfway up, a burst hit near his boots, spraying rock and mud. He dropped flat, waiting for the rhythm of the gun to break, then pushed upward again. By the time he reached the cave mouth, he was close enough to feel the muzzle flash's heat. He rose to one knee, leveled the wand, and fired. A short, violent stream of flame filled the opening. The gunner inside managed one last burst. One round struck Schwab in the hip, spinning him sideways, but he held steady. The wand kept spitting fire until the cave erupted, a blast of smoke and fuel roaring outward in a wash of orange. Then the gun went silent. When the haze cleared, both cave positions on Wilson's Ridge were gone. The Marines rose from the mud and surged forward, taking the high ground that had trapped them for hours. At the crest, only rain and steam broke the silence. What had been a wall of fire was now open terrain. The ridge that stopped an entire company finally belonged to the Marines, won by a man who refused to stop moving. The price had been one man, but his charge broke the stalemate and opened the way for the advance. Through the nights that followed, the hills shook under mortar fire and frantic counterattacks. Japanese soldiers tried to crawl back up the slope, moving through the brush in twos and threes, sometimes slipping among the bodies to reach grenade range. None made it far enough to reclaim the ground. As dawn came, the Marines had dug in around Schwab's body, using the position he'd cleared to emplace their own machine guns. When reinforcements arrived, They widened the perimeter, sealing the caves that had held the battalion in place for 2 days. By May 11th, Wilson's Ridge was firmly in Marine hands. The Awacha Pocket was gone, and Death Valley lay open to the south. The breakthrough broke the northern hinge of Japan's outer defenses, forcing the 32nd Army to withdraw toward the Surrey Line and abandon its forward fortifications. The pullback left exposed flanks on both sides, giving the 1st Marine Divisions room to press forward, with the 7th Marines at Takeshi Ridge, tightening the encirclement around Surrey Castle. As the western high ground fell one after another, Japanese units were driven from their bunkers and gun pits, the network of defenses unraveling under combined Marine and Army pressure. Each mile gained narrowed the perimeter around Surrey and made its position less tenable by the day. Within weeks, the defenders abandoned the castle entirely, retreating to the last ridges of Kunishi and the Oroku Peninsula. What had begun as a single fight for a coral hill above Awacha had helped unhinge the strongest defensive belt on Okinawa. For his gallantry on Wilson's Ridge, Private First Class Albert E. Schwab was awarded the Medal of Honor, presented posthumously on Memorial Day 1946 at Veterans Park in Tulsa. His citation captured the spirit of that day on Okinawa, describing him as, quote, cool and indomitable. He moved forward in the face of a direct concentration of hostile fire, relentlessly closed the enemy position, and attacked. His name endures on 2 distant shores. In Okinawa, Camp Schwab stands as a living reminder of his sacrifice, home to generations of Marines who followed the path he helped clear. In his hometown of Tulsa, the Marine Corps League Detachment bears his name, preserving his memory in the city where his story began. In 2011, with the support of Schwab's family, the Tulsa Marine Corps League commissioned a sculpture for the Central Hall of Tulsa International Airport, now officially Albert E. Schwab Hall. Today, Schwab remains Tulsa's only Medal of Honor recipient.